All right, guys, good afternoon. This is Christian from Hertz Tribeca Trade Group, and it is Tuesday, March 24th. So, a huge bounce day. I would even add humongous bounce day. They said it's the biggest one-day rally since 1933 for the Dow, right? The news media always likes to cover the Dow rather than the S&P, even though the S&P is the main index that everybody looks at these days. But news media likes to always quote the Dow. Regardless, really, I would say I would classify this as a big bottled up rally today. Sentiment had been very washed out. We had a lot of things, just a lot of bad news on the tape. I think we were saying for a couple good days, I think we were saying for the last few days that any possible good news would give us a nice bounce. Well, we got a really, really large bounce today. So the question is, and I'll go over some of these numbers here. Well, I might as well do this now. The Qs finished up 8.5%. The SPY finished up 8.5%. Qs finished up 7.7%. That actually underperformed for the day. Interesting about this, right? I went over this chart yesterday and talked about how well the Qs have been holding up, and they've been stronger. It's tough for me to get to all the questions like that I get on Twitter because I am managing a trading room all day long, and that's my number one priority, is make sure members have the most and best information. But there was an interesting question. I just didn't get a chance to answer it. And the issue with this, right? Like when something has moved this much, like SPYs versus Qs, the spread, it's due for a reversion back, right? We've talked about that too, and we'll look at IWM and SPY, which we talked about in yesterday's video. But when something has done this well, right? Usually there's some type of a catch up when the spread is blown out like this to the upside. So someone was asking me on Twitter, they're like, should I be putting on like a SPY, a long Q position, short SPY? Remember, you want to do this before the move takes place, right? You want to have some foresight and say, okay, this is probably what's going to take place. Now, I personally would not do that trade now because the move's already taken place. Could it continue to see outperformance for as long as this virus situation goes on? Sure, it could, because some of these tech companies are a little bit more sheltered, and some of them are actually going to do good or do well in this environment. So, I would keep an eye on it, but you just want to be cognizant of when the thing gets really overbought. And we finally saw a lot of sectors that have been beaten up today, and I think that was more than anything else, and I think we also saw this a number of times. I don't want to say a number of times, but I believe one day last week too. We saw pretty much an oversold rally in a lot of groups that felt like short covering, right? A lot of the beaten up groups. So I don't know for sure if that's just what we got today. I think today is a little bit different. Even though it was kind of the same, it felt like the same groups, right, that rallied. And this was pointed out by Eric Balchunas. He's a ETF rep, or in charge of ETFs at Bloomberg, I should say. And he was talking about how Tuesdays have been just huge the last few weeks. Back on 310, the Dow was up 4.9%. Back on 317 on St. Patty's Day, it was up 4.4%. And today up 11%. So I do think that, and I believe it was last Tuesday when we saw a rally, it was the same type of groups, right? Just groups that have gotten pounded to no end rallied. So it felt a little bit like that. You have some groups like the industrials were up 12%. The home builders, which have gotten hit very hard, were up 16%. They also had some positive data that came out, which is kind of old, but so that's why some of these groups, like, I don't know if I would necessarily chase here, and the whole market. I think you still have to take things one day at a time. But I wanted to go over some of this performance with you. Bonds, I actually bought a little bit of bonds early in the day, and it worked for a day trade because they actually came back. at one point. So gold was strong, didn't have much of a fluctuation. But this is not, and if you look at the performance change from open to close, the group that really made the moves for the day were Dow stocks, right? Even like the Qs that finished up 7.7%, or excuse me, 7.74%. They only moved up, of that gain. The majority of it was in the overnight market, right? There was only a 2%, which is still a big move, right, in normal circumstances. But we're in a new regime of volatility right now. But this was only up two. The real move again was in some of the unloved names right now, and just crazy moves in a few names. Actually, not a few names, but a lot of names. Small caps did well too. They finished up 9% for the day. They're kind of right in the middle of that Dow and maybe the Qs there. Here's what was a little bit odd to me. The VIX kind of climbed all session long, so that's why I'm not sure if we're. I don't. Well, first of all, I don't think we're out of the woods. But let's look at the VIX first, and then as usual, we'll go over the indices, and I'll give you my interpretation of this. There was a crazy print that happened. I'm guessing that is wrong. I don't know why it's still there, but it is what it is. So we're down to a 61. We've dropped below. I've talked about the 5-period moving average was the first thing that we need to get under. Again, I would like to see this continue to move down. Like the fact that this was actually like flat to up today, not the best thing, but you have to take things one day at a time. We're not going to get all these moves in a day or two. It's a process, right? Which is basically what I said yesterday with a lot of the things that we were talking about. How I was basically breaking things down in terms of things that fell in the positive column versus things that fell in the negative column, and there was much more that fell in the positive column, but it wasn't 100%, right? I talked about credit spreads, which I'll talk about again today. So again, I would like to see this move kind of get back below 55 first and then 50. That would give me a little bit more confirmation. But again, it is a process, right? And that would also get us below the 20-day moving average, right, for the VIX. But it's not one of these things where I can just basically I'm going to add a ton of risk when that happens. It's a process. I begin to like add a little bit more risk as we go along. Now on days like this, right? So you have to take profits, right? And that was the first thing that I did with some trades. And I haven't like loaded the boat with risk, but I definitely had some trades on, right? Where I was able to kind of take some things off. I was long Apple and the Qs. Someone had asked me yesterday in the trading room, what did I think in terms of this Senate vote? And I said, a long Qs play I thought would be the right way to play. So that worked quite nicely, and I took those Qs off. I was flirting around yesterday. I had an option on. I took the option off and just went long some Qs for overnight. I took those off right on the open. I was also long some Apple going into today, and I took that all off at the open as well. I also traded Apple later in the day too. I'll show you my whole trading blotter for the day so that you can see. But this is a different bar, right? The thing that's a little bit different about this with the S&P futures, we had one. And again, this is like if you go to the performance, right? I was looking at the Dow, right? And again, that number they're going to talk about. They're going to soak that number up. The biggest rally in the Dow since 1933. The media is going to soak that number up. But note that we had back here. This was Friday on. Friday the 13th, we had a plus 8.5% day. So this has happened before, and remember what happened thereafter. Then on Monday, we fell 11%. So the one thing that's nice, again, we'll talk about the positive and we'll talk about the negative here. The positive is that we finally retook this 5-period moving average. So it's a start, right? That's a good thing. We just don't know if one day is not a trend. We got a nice reversal bar here. So one day is not a trend, but perhaps we could get a second day tomorrow if they pass this thing, this Senate thing that has to go through. There was a really nice question in the room about what I thought about that as well. I don't think we're not going to get the same type of rally. Remember how the market is always adjusting. It is adjusting on probabilities. So the higher the probability, the chances that the deal is going to go through, the market adjusts to that real time. It doesn't wait for the deal to go through. It adjusts based on the more and more that the probability increases that that deal is going to happen, the market begins to rally off of it, and it rallies more and more and more. So, and again, a lot of times in trading, it's buy the rumor and sell the news. So I don't think we're going to sell off if once they get the deal done per se, but it's probably not going to move like we did today. But I don't know, and I don't have a crystal ball, so I have some exposure on, after making sure that that I lock some gains in, because after seeing something like this the last few weeks, we just don't know if this is a bear market rally day, and it does have some similarities, from one of the other rally days where we saw a lot of the names that had been beaten up rally. So, and some of the leaders that we've seen in the last couple weeks, like Amazon, for example, didn't do anything today. And some of the overcrowded virus names like Zoom, went down today. That's just how it works, right? Those hiding places that get overcrowded. There's profit takers that go into those names, because I got a couple questions about that too. Like, why is Zoom down today? Well, because it's overcrowded. All right, so that kind of sums this up. So again, I think progress. We just need a little bit of follow through, and nobody knows if we're going to get that. You just kind of have to be positioned the right way, and not get long at the wrong times, right? Nasdaq, interesting. There was a VPOC that was taken out there. Now, I wanted to go back to the S&P, right? Because one of the things that I had pointed out, a level that I thought could be taken out, or that we could get down to, is this 2103. Now, we don't have to get down to that. There's nothing that says that and I've covered this already, but I just want to review it, now that we're a little bit away from it. The further that we get away from this thing, actually, the better. We don't want to be hanging around here, because then there's higher probability that this will get taken out. But if we start moving further and further away from it, we don't. There's less magnetic force with these Virgin point of controls. So interesting with the Nasdaq. I'll go back here to the Nasdaq. On the week, we're now back inside value on the weekly. So I wanted to make sure I covered these weekly charts. Again, developing bars. We're only at Tuesday. But there was a VPOC taken out to the downside yesterday in the Qs. So again, even though the Qs weren't up as much as like the Dow, it still looks pretty damn a little bit more constructive, right? We're taking back. This is the highest close, basically since that 13th of the month. All right. So basically, take these things one day at a time. IWM, which has been beaten up the most. We'll review that chart as well. Let's look at. Let's go to IWM. We can look at the Qs as well. That's how IWM versus the Qs looks. IWM SPY. Again, this is good, right? It's good to see. Now, they don't have to come all the way back, but just wanted to see IWM outperform a little bit. And I think that's also different. So again, I would put that in the positive column, just as I did yesterday. Credit spreads. That was the one thing that didn't seem right to me yesterday. So if we go to IEI and HYG, it's got a little bit of a different look today. It backed off pretty decently, right? So again, one day, not a trend. It's still in an uptrend, but at least this is kind of confirming the action. So we got a couple positives. One of the things I think is as a negative is the VIX didn't sell off hard, but you still have this Senate deal, so maybe the VIX is still going to be heightened once once and until this deal goes through. So we'll have to watch that. So some of the moves, I've been basically trading names that I'm very familiar with. A couple days, maybe last week, I started to kind of, what was the phrase that I was using? Getting a little bit outside of my lane, right? As they say, you should stay in your lane. I think I started to get involved in a little bit more like secondary names, like some smaller cap names. And I kind of got beat up a little bit on Friday, which I was whining about that on Friday. So I really have been staying pretty lean. Like I said, I got out of the Qs and Apple. I traded a little bit of DHI, Home Builder, which I thought could run a little bit more. I put on Amazon, which didn't do anything all day long. So here's the thing with options, right? It's a big deal if you have on options versus stock, right? I've talked in detail about that. This was very difficult today for me in Microsoft because the calls, I'm in leaps. Like it's not like I'm in short term. It's not like I'm in a short-term options trade. I'm in, January calls. They barely even moved today. The stock was up $12, $9. And I'm in the, it could be that my strike is a little bit too far away. I'm in the 165 strike, but the calls barely even moved today. So it's really, really tricky with options. Now, if you were in something that was up 20% today, then you probably got the calls, they moved pretty nicely, but it's still, I'm still not going to be trading many options, unless selling premium with when you've got the VIX where it is right now, which is a 60. So we are off the highs of an 85, but that again tells me we're nowhere near out of the woods. The option premium is just too expensive and very difficult to make an option trade work if you're not selling premium, if you're outright long. All right, so that was so I try to kind of take advantage while the premium is still hot and sell a little bit of calls versus my January position. Here is my TLT trade. Again, this worked. I think I exited that at 165. Now, I think more of a catalyst could be versus at this point, now as more and more probability is being priced in that the Senate gets this deal done. I think what could be another catalyst as we go into the end of the month is quarter end rebalancing. Maybe we see a little bit of rotation out of bonds and into equities. I think that is what the street is thinking. Keep in mind that end of month isn't until Tuesday, but TLT will only be day trades for me because I certainly don't want to get caught on the wrong side of that one. And then Apple, there was some news about Apple staggering their openings, but I've had my eye on Apple since Friday, and that's why I added it yesterday. We had the VPOC takeout, and I went over Apple in yesterday's chart, in yesterday's video, but this is really that's a really nice looking bar if we close here on the weekly. Other names that look very good. AMD, we've talked about this one as well. Nice move here, and I am long this in the tactical portfolio. Also made a nice move. I mean, this thing is not that far from 52-week highs, considering how much technical damage there is in some places. This one is not one of them. Really nice bounce on the 200-day moving average, and I talked about this back on the 18th. So last week, I talked about how Nvidia and AMD both were showing some nice relative strength in the semis. By the way, the semis that we went over yesterday, up another 10%. That ended up being a pretty nice sign, for today, seeing the semis outperform as much as they did yesterday. Also a couple names that we saw a little bit of option activity in, about a week and a half ago. We saw June calls went up in Salesforce. Also, Salesforce coming right back into that range. So, again, here probably a place to take some profits if you've added the over the last week or so. So that's, again, when you have a day like this, I'm always more of a net seller. And then what I try to do is try to be cute sometimes and put on a few small trades into this. But if we get some type of like inside day tomorrow where the market doesn't move that much, could you imagine that? Then that might be a place, and if by chance we go a little bit lower, that might give you another opportunity for kind of later in the week. But again, I'm just speculating here. I don't know what the market's going to do day to day. But I like, again, more things that happen today versus negatives. What was another name that I was looking at today that looked really good? Shopify took the 200-day moving average back yesterday. Real nice move in this one. TTD. I was looking at this name for FTNT today. Also had a huge day, so it was nice to see this also. A lot of the software names that have been pretty beaten up. And if you look at some names, like I was looking at, for example, Zendesk. And if you look at the hours, right? One thing to note here was that there was, where's the RSI on here? Must have fallen off for some reason. But I started to see some bullish divergence. We talked about that yesterday with the VIX. But notice how this Zendesk made a new low, but the RSI didn't make a new low here. So that's a bullish divergence. And the same thing with AMD. That also, I believe, well, I guess it didn't make a new low over here. Maybe I was thinking of another name. Apple did not make a new. This was also a bullish divergence here. The RSI made a new low here, but did not make a new low here. By the way, look at that last VPOC being taken out. So Apple, I think, a name to watch for tomorrow. They did announce that they're going to be staggering their reopening of stores in outside of everywhere else besides China, I believe. Once we get into April. And again, they've been pretty smart, and that's why I've liked Apple, even though it hasn't been trading that well up until today, up 10% today. But I do think it could possibly get to 255 by the end of the week, which is another $8 up. All right, guys, I'll leave it there for the day. I think that's enough. There'll be plenty of more analysis to do. Again, it's only Tuesday. These weeks, I'll tell you. With the volatility as high as it is, it just seems to make the week go longer and longer. Again, the major theme is that this is a process. You have to survive in advance each day and not get caught. If you have FOMO, if you think that you missed some of these moves because they were huge, but granted, a lot of these names are basically just back to where they were, some point last week. So don't put this out of perspective that we had one big day. I think you still want to be careful about how you're positioning until the VIX gets back below 50. All right, guys, have a great night and see you tomorrow.